The champagne glass slipped from Madison's fingers as she stared at the familiar signature on the foreclosure notice. The same signature she'd seen 1,000 times on her mother's paychecks. The same arrogant scrawl that belonged to the man who'd just humiliated her in front of Chicago's elite, calling her too poor to understand how real business worked. What he didn't know was that 3 months ago, she'd quietly purchased his family's crushing debt from their desperate creditors. Every mortgage, every business loan, every line of credit that kept his empire afloat now belonged to a 24-year-old woman whose mother cleaned his. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The marble floors of the Pemberton estate gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, as Madison Torres carefully arranged the imported orchids in the grand foyer. Her mother, Carmen, had been the head housekeeper here for 16 years, and Madison had practically grown up in the shadows of this mansion's opulent halls. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't here to help her mother prepare for another lavish party. Tonight, she was here as an invited guest. The irony wasn't lost on her as she smoothed down her simple black dress, the most expensive thing she owned, purchased with money from her first major business deal. Around her, Chicago's wealthiest families mingled in designer gowns worth more than most people's annual salaries, their laughter echoing through rooms Madison had scrubbed and polished countless times as a teenager. Madison, right? The voice belonged to Victoria Ashworth, whose family owned half the commercial real estate downtown. I heard you graduated from Northwestern with honors. Business, wasn't it? Before Madison could respond, a familiar voice cut through the conversation like a blade. Oh, that's Carmen's daughter. The maid's kid who thinks she can play in the big leagues now. Madison's stomach clenched as she turned to face Nathaniel Pemberton III, the heir to the Pemberton fortune and the most insufferable person she'd ever encountered. At 28, he'd never worked a real day in his life, living off his trust fund and his father's hotel empire while making everyone around him miserable with his entitled attitude. Nathaniel. Victoria said with obvious discomfort, Madison was just telling me about her consulting work. Consulting? Nathaniel laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Is that what we're calling it when someone helps small businesses file their taxes? How, ... quaint. He took a sip of his whiskey, his pale blue eyes never leaving Madison's face. Tell me, Madison, what exactly do you consult on? How to stretch $1 until it screams. The conversation around them had begun to die down, other guests sensing the tension but unsure how to respond. Madison felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. Actually, I specialize in debt restructuring and financial recovery. I help companies navigate complex financial situations. Debt restructuring, Nathaniel repeated, making it sound like a dirty phrase. How fitting. I suppose growing up around here gave you plenty of experience with financial difficulties. His gaze swept over her dress dismissively. Though I have to say, you've certainly dressed up nicely for the occasion. Did you save up for months for that little number? Madison's hands clenched at her sides. She'd dealt with condescension before, but never quite this publicly. And never from someone whose family had indirectly shaped so much of her life. She remembered being 12 years old, sitting in the kitchen while her mother cried over bills. Exhausted from working double shifts to keep food on the table in Madison Inn. School. The dress was a gift, she said quietly, which was technically true. She had bought it for herself after closing a particularly difficult case. A gift, Nathaniel mused, swirling his drink. How generous of someone. Though I suppose charity is important. He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough that only she could hear. You know, Madison, there's nothing wrong with knowing your place. Your mother is excellent at what she does, very ... thorough, perhaps. You should consider following in her footsteps, instead of pretending to be something you're not. The words hit Madison like physical blows. Around them, the party continued, but she felt completely isolated in this bubble of humiliation. Victoria had moved away, clearly uncomfortable with Nathaniel's behavior, and other guests were either oblivious or choosing to ignore the scene unfolding. I mean, really, Nathaniel continued, his voice growing louder again, more performative. You're too poor to understand how real wealth works, how real business operates. This isn't some community college economics class where everyone gets a participation trophy. This is the real world, where breeding and background actually matter. Madison felt something cold settle in her chest, pushing down the hurt and embarrassment. She'd learned long ago that responding to bullies with emotion only gave them more ammunition. Instead, she smiled a small, knowing smile that seemed to catch Nathaniel off guard. "You're absolutely right," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Background does matter. Experience shapes perspective. And you're right that I've learned things most people never have to." Nathaniel's eyebrows rose, clearly expecting a different response. "Well, at least you're being honest about your limitations." "Oh, I wasn't talking about limitations," Madison replied. "I was talking about opportunities. You see, when you grow up watching your mother work 3 jobs to pay rent, you learn the value of $1. When you have to choose between school supplies and groceries, you learn to prioritize. And when you spend your evenings in the business district, walking past all those gleaming office buildings while carrying your mother's cleaning supplies, you learn to pay attention to things other people miss." She paused, noting how Nathaniel's smug expression was beginning to waver slightly. Things like which buildings have 4 lease signs that stay up a little too long, which companies keep their lights on late because they're scrambling to make payroll, which family businesses are quietly shopping for buyers because the 3rd generation can't quite manage what the 1st generation built. The color was beginning to drain from Nathaniel's face. But Madison wasn't finished. "You learn to read financial statements like bedtime stories because you have to understand why your mother comes home crying some nights. Not from exhaustion, but from worry. Worry about whether the family she works for will be able to keep paying her, whether their businesses will survive another quarter, whether their debts are catching up with them faster than their income can cover." She took a small step closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "And sometimes, Nathaniel, you'll learn that the families who look down on you the most are the ones hanging by the thinnest threads." For the first time since she'd known him, Nathaniel Pemberton was speechless. The confidence that usually radiated from him like expensive cologne seemed to evaporate, leaving behind something much more fragile and uncertain. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Madison said, straightening her shoulders and smoothing her dress once more, "I need to find your father. We have some business to discuss." Madison navigated through the crowd of guests, her heart still pounding from the confrontation with Nathaniel, but her mind was razor-sharp with purpose. She found Harrison Pemberton Sr. in his private study, a room she'd dusted hundreds of times, but never entered as anything other than the help's daughter. The older man looked up from his brandy, surprised to see her. "Madison," he said, rising with the practiced courtesy that came from decades of hosting. "I didn't expect to see you at tonight's gathering. How lovely that you could join us." Unlike his son, Harrison had always treated her mother with respect, even kindness. He'd paid for Madison's school supplies when times were particularly tough, though he'd done it quietly, through Carmen, never making it feel like charity. It made what she was about to do infinitely more difficult. "Mr. Pemberton, I was hoping we could speak privately." "About business." Harrison's eyebrows rose, but he gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "Of course. Though I have to admit I'm curious about what business we might have together." Madison sat down, crossing her legs professionally and pulling out her phone. 3 months ago, Chicago Federal Bank sold a portfolio of commercial loans to a private investment firm. The portfolio included several properties here in the Gold Coast District. "I'm not sure I follow," Harrison said. Though something in his expression suggested he was beginning to understand, "The investment firm was mine," Madison continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "Crescent Point Capital. I established it 18 months ago after my consulting business began generating significant revenue." Harrison's brandy glass stopped halfway to his lips. "Your consulting business?" "I started small, helping family-owned restaurants and shops restructure their debt during the pandemic." Word spread. "Soon, I was working with larger companies, then developers, and hospitality groups." Madison scrolled through her phone, pulling up financial documents. Last year alone, I helped restructure over 40 million in distressed debt. My success rate is 93%. The older man set down his glass with trembling fingers. Madison, what exactly are you telling me? I'm telling you that when Chicago Federal needed to clean up their books, they came to me. The Pemberton Hotel Group's loans, your personal mortgages, even the line of credit you took out for tonight's party, it all came in one package. She looked up from her phone, meeting his eyes directly. You owe my company $12.7 million, Mr. Pemberton, and according to the terms I inherited, you're already 60 days past due. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Harrison's face had gone ashen, and Madison could see him processing not just the financial implications, but the personal ones. The maid's daughter, the girl who used to do homework in his kitchen now, held his family's fate in her hands. This can't be right, he whispered. The bank assured us they'd work with us on the timeline. Thompson at Chicago Federal said, Mr. Thompson was let go 6 weeks ago, Madison said gently. The bank's new management decided to liquidate their hospitality loans rather than carry them. Through another difficult quarter, I bought the portfolio for 60 cents on the dollar. Harrison stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked his manicured gardens. How much did you pay? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 7.6 million, and you expect us to pay the full amount? Madison studied his reflection in the dark window. That depends on what you're offering. The door burst open without warning, and Nathaniel stumbled in, clearly having helped himself to more whiskey since their encounter. Dad, there you are. I was looking everywhere. He stopped short when he saw Madison, his face twisting with renewed disdain. Oh, you're still here. I thought you'd have run back to the servants' quarters by now, Nathaniel. Not now, Harrison said sharply. Actually, Dad, this is perfect timing. Nathaniel moved closer to Madison's chair, swaying slightly. I think our little housemaid's daughter needs to understand something about how things work in the real world. See, Madison, when you grow up with money, real money, you learn that there are people who matter and people who don't. People who build things and people who just ... Clean up after them? Madison remained perfectly still, watching Harrison's reflection grow more tense with each word his son spoke. You can put on a nice dress. You can use fancy business words. But at the end of the day, you're still Carmen's kid. Still the girl who used to clean our toilets? Nathaniel leaned against his father's desk, his voice growing more vicious. And if you think for 1 second that anyone in this room, anyone in this city, will ever see you as anything more than the help, you're even more delusional than I thought, Nathaniel. Stop. Harrison's voice was sharp with warning. No, Dad. She needs to hear this. Madison, whatever little business fantasy you've been playing with, it's time to wake up. People like us don't do business with people like you. We don't negotiate with the maid's daughter. We certainly don't let her pretend she has any kind of power or influence in our world. Madison stood slowly, smoothing her dress with deliberate calm. You're absolutely right, Nathaniel. People like you don't usually negotiate with people like me. Nathaniel smirked, pleased with what he took as capitulation. Finally, some sense. Which is exactly why Madison continued, her voice growing stronger. People like you end up in situations like this one. She pulled out a manila folder from her purse, something she'd prepared but hoped she wouldn't need to use. You want to talk about the real world? Let's talk about the real world. Your hotel occupancy rates have been declining for 18 months. Your restaurant revenues are down 37% from pre-pandemic levels. The convention center contract you were counting on fell through when Midwest Hospitality underbid you by 20%. Nathaniel's smirk began to falter as Madison opened the folder your father borrowed against the Michigan Avenue property to cover operating expenses. Then he borrowed against the River North location to cover the payments on the Michigan Avenue loan. Then he took out a business line of credit to cover both. She looked directly at Nathaniel. His face was now pale beneath his expensive tan. Your family is 3 months away from bankruptcy, and the only thing that's been keeping you afloat is the patience of creditors who believed in your fathers. Reputation, that's impossible, Nathaniel said. But his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Your trust fund? Madison continued relentlessly. It's been completely liquidated to cover operational shortfalls. The Aspen condo was quietly sold last month. Even your mother's jewelry collection has been appraised for potential liquidation. Harrison had turned from the window, his face a mask of defeat. How do you know all this? Because when you buy someone's debt, Nathaniel, you get access to everything. Every financial statement, every asset assessment, every desperate email your father sent to the bank begging for more time. Madison's voice was steady, professional, but there was steel underneath. And the most interesting thing I learned is that your family's financial problems started long before the pandemic. They started when your father made the mistake of trusting his son too. Handled the business expansion 3 years ago. Nathaniel stumbled backward as if he'd been physically struck. That's not, we had a plan, ... You had fantasies. You borrowed money you couldn't afford to chase markets you didn't understand, and when it started falling apart, you blamed everyone except the person responsible. Madison closed the folder with a sharp snap. The person who's been living like a millionaire while his family's empire crumbled around him. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of the party continuing below. Nathaniel had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, while Harrison stood frozen by the window. So here's how the real world works, Madison said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Tomorrow morning, I can file for immediate foreclosure on all properties. Your guests downstairs can read about the Pemberton family's bankruptcy in next week's Tribune. Or ... Double quotes. She paused, letting the alternative hang in the air. Or, Harrison whispered, or we can discuss a restructuring plan that might save your family's reputation. If not your fortune, the grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds as Harrison Pemberton contemplated his family's future. Nathaniel remained slumped in his chair, the weight of his failures finally crushing his entitled facade. Madison stood perfectly still, waiting for their response, her professional demeanor masking the storm of emotions beneath. What kind of restructuring are you proposing? Harrison finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Madison opened her phone again, pulling up a detailed spreadsheet. I've analyzed your assets, your revenue streams, and your market position. The Pemberton name still carries weight in Chicago hospitality, despite recent setbacks. With proper management and strategic downsizing, the business can be salvaged. Downsizing, Harrison repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. The River North property is your most valuable asset, but it's also your biggest drain. The location is prime, but the building needs $8 million in renovations you can't afford. I propose selling it to a developer I work with. The proceeds would cover 60% of your debt to my company. Nathaniel looked up sharply. You want us to sell the flagship hotel? That property has been in our family for 30 years. Your family mortgaged it twice in the last 18 months. Madison replied without emotion. It's not really yours anymore anyway. At least this way, you get to choose the buyer instead of watching it go to auction. Harrison moved to his desk, sinking into his leather chair with the weariness of a man who'd aged a decade in one evening. In the other properties, the Michigan Avenue location has potential. With the right renovations and a focus on boutique luxury rather than competing with the major chains, it could be profitable again. I'm prepared to convert my remaining debt into equity. Equity, Nathaniel said, his voice hollow. You want to become our business partner? Madison's smile was razor sharp. I want to become majority owner, 60%. Your family retains 40% in operational control. But all major financial decisions go through me. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the study's thick walls, they could still hear the murmur of the party, the clink of champagne glasses, the laughter of people who had no idea that one of Chicago's oldest hospitality empires was crumbling just floors above them. There has to be another way, Harrison said desperately. We could find other investors, or perhaps restructure with different terms, Mr. Pemberton. Madison interrupted gently. I've spent the last 6 months watching you try to find other investors. Goldman Sachs passed. JP Morgan passed. Even the private equity firms won't touch hospitality debt right now. Not with the uncertainty in commercial real estate. She walked to the window. Looking out at the gardens she'd helped her mother maintain during her teenage years, I'm not your enemy here. If I were, I would have simply foreclosed and liquidated everything for maximum return. Instead, I'm offering you a path forward, a path that leaves us working for the maid's daughter. Nathaniel spat, some of his venom returning. Madison turned back to face him. And for the first time that evening, her professional mask slipped completely. You know what, Nathaniel? You're right. You would be working for the maid's daughter. The same maid's daughter who watched your mother throw away more food in a single dinner party than my family ate in a week. The same maid's daughter who had to take 3 buses to get to school because we couldn't afford a car. While you crashed a different sports car every semester. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. The same maid's daughter who spent her childhood Saturday mornings helping her mother scrub your family's floors while you slept off hangovers from parties that cost more than our annual rent. Who studied for her business degree at the kitchen table where your mother would dump her jewelry for cleaning, carelessly dropping diamonds and pearls like they were worthless trinkets. Harrison watched this exchange with growing understanding, seeing perhaps for the first time the true cost of his son's entitled cruelty. But here's what you never understood. Nathaniel, Madison continued, her eyes blazing. While you were learning how to spend money you hadn't earned, I was learning how to make it. While you were coasting on your family name, I was building a reputation based on results. While you were destroying everything your grandfather built, I was studying exactly how successful people think, how they plan, how they execute. She moved closer to his chair. I learned it all from watching your family, not just the successes, but the failures. Every poor decision, every missed opportunity, every moment of arrogance that blinded you to reality. You were my case study in how not to manage wealth. Nathaniel had gone completely silent, staring at his hands. So yes, Madison said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than any shout. You would be working for the maid's daughter. The maid's daughter who built a multi-million-dollar company by age 24. The maid's daughter who saved 6 other family businesses this year alone. The maid's daughter who's offering to save yours. Despite every cruel word you've ever said to her or her mother, she straightened, smoothing her dress once more, a gesture that had become her signature move for regaining composure. The question is whether your pride is worth more than your family's legacy. Harrison stood up slowly, moving to a painting on the wall, a portrait of his own father, the original Harrison Pemberton who had built the hotel empire from nothing. What would happen to the staff? The people who have worked for us for years? Under my management structure, no one would be laid off for at least 18 months. After that, any staffing decisions would be based on performance and business necessity. It's not cost-cutting for short-term gains. And my son? Madison glanced at Nathaniel, who was still staring at his hands. That depends entirely on whether he's willing to learn. I need someone who understands the operational side of the business, but they need to understand it as an employee, not as someone entitled to a position they haven't earned. You want me to start at the bottom? Nathaniel said quietly. I want you to start where your skills actually are, Madison corrected, which, based on the financial records I've reviewed, is considerably lower than where you think you belong. Harrison returned to his desk and picked up a gold-plated pen, the same pen Madison had watched him sign her mother's paychecks with for 16 years. If we agree to this, what's the timeline? I need signed paperwork by Friday. The foreclosure proceedings are automatically triggered on Monday if we don't have a signed agreement in place. 3 days. 3 days to decide whether you want to save your business or lose everything to pride. Harrison looked at his son, then at Madison, then at the portrait of his father. I built this company to honor my family's name. My father started with nothing and created something lasting. I won't be the generation that destroys it completely. He clicked the pen and pulled out a legal pad. Draft the papers. We accept your terms. Nathaniel's head snapped up. Dad, you can't be serious. We can find another way. There is no other way. Harrison's voice cracked with emotion. Do you think I haven't tried? Do you think I haven't spent the last year calling every contact I have, begging for extensions, searching for alternatives? He gestured toward Madison. She's not our problem, Nathaniel. She's our solution. And if you were half the businessman you pretend to be, you'd recognize that. Madison pulled out a business card and placed it on Harrison's desk. My attorney will have the contracts ready by Wednesday. We can sign Thursday, which gives us a one-day buffer before the deadline. She moved toward the door, then paused. Mr. Pemberton, for what it's worth, I'm going to do everything I can to make this work. Your family gave my mother steady employment for 16 years. I don't take that lightly. As she reached for the door handle, Nathaniel's voice stopped her. Madison. She turned back to see him standing, his face a mixture of shame and something that might have been respect. I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Madison studied his face for a long moment. Apologies are a start, Nathaniel. But what I really need from you is competence. Can you give me that? He nodded slowly. I can try, then we'll see what happens. Madison opened the door, and the sounds of the party flooded back in laughter, conversation, the clink of expensive crystal. She stepped out into the hallway, leaving behind the study where she'd just fundamentally altered the balance of power, one of Chicago's most prominent families. As she walked back toward the main party, she passed the kitchen where her mother was likely putting away the last of the evening's dishes. Tomorrow, Carmen Torres would wake up not knowing that her daughter now owned the house where she worked. But that conversation could wait. Tonight. Madison had proven that sometimes the best revenge wasn't cruelty, it was competence. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you could do to someone who looked down on you was to rise so high that they had to look up. 3 days later, Madison sat in the 42nd floor conference room of Hartwell and Associates, Chicago's most prestigious law firm. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Lake Michigan, but her attention was focused on the stack of contracts spread across the mahogany table. Across from her, Harrison. Pemberton looked like he'd aged another decade since their conversation in his study. Nathaniel sat beside his father, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but his usual arrogance had been replaced by something Madison had never seen from him before: humility. It didn't look comfortable on him. The terms are exactly as we discussed, Madison's attorney, Rebecca Chen, explained to the Pemberton family lawyer. 60% ownership transferred to Ms. Torres's company, with the Pemberton family retaining 40% in operational oversight under Ms. Torres's strategic direction. Harrison's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Douglas Webb, who'd been handling Pemberton legal affairs for 20 years, reviewed the documents with the careful attention of someone who knew his clients were drowning. The debt forgiveness clause is quite generous, he admitted grudgingly. Ms. Torres could have demanded full payment plus penalties, Rebecca replied smoothly. Instead, she's converting the majority of the debt into equity, which preserves the business and maintains family involvement. Madison watched Harrison's face as he processed the reality of what they were signing. She understood the weight of this moment for him: his grandfather's legacy, his father's expansion dreams, all of it now flowing through the hands of someone who used to help serve drinks at his parties. There's one additional matter, Madison said, opening a separate folder. I've prepared transition plans for the management structure, but I wanted to discuss them before we finalize everything. She slid a detailed organizational chart across the table. I'm bringing in Sarah Mitchell as the new general manager for the Michigan Avenue property. She successfully turned around the Riverside Hotel Group over the past 3 years, increasing their revenue by 45%. Harrison studied the chart. And Nathaniel's role? Assistant manager, reporting directly to Sarah. He'll handle vendor relations, staff scheduling, and guest services coordination. It's a position where he can learn the operational fundamentals, while it's contributing meaningfully to the business. Nathaniel looked up sharply. Assistant manager? I've been running strategic planning for the entire company. Madison's expression didn't change, but there was steel in her voice. Strategic planning that resulted in $12.7 million in debt and 3 failed expansion attempts. Nathaniel, you're going to learn this business from the ground up. the way your grandfather did. Or you're going to find yourself looking for work elsewhere. Ms. Torres, Douglas Webb interjected diplomatically. Perhaps we could discuss a more senior position. Mr. Webb, Madison interrupted, with respect. Your client's son has demonstrated a remarkable talent for making expensive mistakes. I'm offering him a chance to develop actual competence. He can accept that opportunity or forfeit his 40% family stake and walk away with a severance package. The room fell silent. Harrison looked at his son, who was staring at the organizational chart with a mixture of anger and something that might have been recognition. Dad, Nathaniel said quietly. She's right. Harrison's eyebrows rose in surprise. I screwed up, Nathaniel continued, his voice gaining strength. The Phoenix expansion, the restaurant concept downtown, the convention center bid. I made those decisions based on what I thought would make me look smart, not on what made business sense. He looked directly at Madison. I've spent my entire adult life thinking I was entitled to success because of my last name. It never occurred to me that I might actually have to earn it. Madison studied his face, looking for traces of the manipulative charm he'd used to talk his way out of consequences his entire life. What she saw instead was exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. The assistant manager position comes with full benefits and a salary of $85,000 annually, she said. Performance reviews every 6 months, with advancement based on measurable results. You'll start Monday morning at 7 a.m. 7 a.m., Nathaniel repeated, clearly unfamiliar with the concept of arriving anywhere before 9. The hospitality business doesn't run on banker's hours, Madison explained. You'll learn that quickly enough. Rebecca Chen cleared her throat. If everyone is in agreement with the management structure, we can proceed with the signing. For the next hour, they worked through the contracts page by page. Harrison signed each document with steady hands, but Madison could see the emotional toll in his eyes. This was the end of everything he'd known about his family's place in Chicago society. When the final signature was complete, Rebecca gathered the papers efficiently. The ownership transfer will be official as of Monday morning. Congratulations, Ms. Torres. You're now the majority owner of the Pemberton Hotel Group. The words hung in the air like smoke. Madison felt a strange mixture of triumph and melancholy. She'd achieved something her teenage self could never have imagined. But it had come at the cost of destroying a family that, despite their flaws, had been a constant presence in her life. Mr. Pemberton, she said, as they prepared to leave, I want you to know that I plan to honor your family's legacy. The Pemberton name will remain on the buildings. Harrison's throat worked silently for a moment before he could speak. Thank you. That means more than you know. As the lawyers packed up their briefcases and prepared to leave, Nathaniel approached Madison's chair. Can I ask you something? She nodded. Double quotes. When did you decide to do this? When did you decide to buy our debt? Madison considered the question carefully. I didn't set out to destroy your family, if that's what you're asking. When Chicago Federal offered me the portfolio, I saw it as a business opportunity. It wasn't until I reviewed the files that I realized which properties were involved. But you could have walked away. Once you knew it was us, I could have, Madison agreed. But honestly, Nathaniel, after years of watching your family waste opportunities that other people would kill for, I felt like I could do better. Your father built something valuable, and you were destroying it through incompetence and arrogance. She stood up, gathering her purse and coat. This way, at least the business survives. Your employees keep their jobs. Your family maintains some dignity instead of losing everything in a public bankruptcy. And you get your revenge, Nathaniel said quietly. Madison paused at the door. If I wanted revenge, I would have bought your debt and foreclosed immediately. What I wanted was justice. There's a difference. She turned to face him fully. You spent years treating me and my mother like we were invisible, like we didn't matter because we didn't have money. But the thing about being invisible is that you see everything. I saw how your family operated, how you made decisions, where you were vulnerable. You studied us. I learned from you. The good and the bad. Your grandfather's original business model was brilliant personal service, attention to detail, building relationships with repeat customers. Your father maintained that vision while expanding thoughtfully. But you. .. She shook her head. You thought being born into success meant you were automatically qualified to manage. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. I'm not going to pretend I deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm going to try to earn back some respect. Starting Monday at 7 a.m., Madison smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given him in years. I hope you do, Nathaniel. For your father's sake. For the sake of everyone who works for this company. As she left the law office and stepped into the Chicago afternoon, Madison felt the weight of what she'd accomplished settling on her shoulders. By Monday morning, she would control one of the city's most recognizable hospitality brands. The girl who used to clean the Pemberton bathrooms would now decide their future. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Mia, Mr. Pemberton asked me to work late tonight. Some big meeting tomorrow. You should come for dinner Sunday. I'll make your favorite. Madison stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I'll be there, Mama, and I have some news to share, as she walked toward her car. Madison realized that the hardest conversation of this entire process was still ahead of her. How do you tell your mother that you now own the house where she's worked for 16 years? How do you explain that her daughter had risen to heights that neither of them had ever dared to imagine? But that was a problem for Sunday dinner. Today, she was going to savor the moment when everything she'd worked for finally came together. Today, she was going to enjoy being the woman who proved that sometimes. The person you underestimate the most is the one who holds all the power. Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Chicago feel alive with possibility. Madison stood outside her mother's modest apartment building in Pilsen, holding a bottle of expensive wine and rehearsing the conversation she'd been dreading all week. Through the second-floor window, she could see Carmen moving around the kitchen, probably preparing enough food to feed half the neighborhood, a habit that came from years of never knowing when the next paycheck might be. Delayed, the apartment smelled like garlic, cumin, and home-cooked love. When Madison walked in, Carmen Torres emerged from the kitchen wearing her favorite apron, one Madison had bought her for Mother's Day 3 years ago, and wrapped her daughter in the kind of embrace that still made everything feel manageable. Mia, you look tired, Carmen said, studying Madison's face with the sharp eyes of someone who'd raised a daughter while working 3 jobs. Are you eating enough? You're too skinny. I'm fine, Mama. Just working a lot. Madison handed her the wine. This is from that place on Michigan Avenue you like. Carmen's eyebrows rose as she examined the label. This is expensive, Madison. You don't need to spend so much money on your old mother. If only she knew, Madison thought, following Carmen into the small but immaculate kitchen. The apartment hadn't changed much since. It's Madison's childhood, the same mismatched furniture bought secondhand and lovingly maintained. The same photographs covering every available surface. The same sense of warmth that came from people who understood the value of what they had. So tell me about this big news, Carmen said, stirring a pot of pozole that smelled like Madison's childhood. You sounded excited on the phone. Madison sat at the small kitchen table where she'd done homework for 12 years, where she'd filled out college applications, where she'd told her mother about her first business client. Now, she was about to tell her something that would change both their lives forever. Mama, do you remember when I was little and you used to take me to work with you sometimes during school breaks? Carmen smiled, not looking up from her cooking. You were so curious about everything, always asking questions about the business, about how hotels worked. Mrs. Pemberton used to say you were going to be somebody important someday. Do you remember what you told me about dreaming big? I told you that in America, if you work hard and you're smart, you can achieve anything, even if people look down on you because of where you come from. Carmen turned to face her daughter. Why? What's this about? Madison took a deep breath. 3 months ago, I bought the Pemberton Hotel Group. The wooden spoon clattered to the F. Carmen stared at her daughter for a long moment, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been pride. What do you mean you bought it? I mean, I own it now. 60% controlling interest. The hotels, the properties, business, it all belongs to my company now. Carmen slowly picked up the spoon, rinsed it in the sink, and set it aside. Then she sat down heavily in the chair across from Madison. How is that possible? For the next hour, Madison explained everything. The consulting business that had grown beyond her wildest expectations. The investment company she'd quietly built. The portfolio of distressed debt that had included the Pemberton family's loans. The confrontation at the party, the negotiations, the signed contracts that made her one of Chicago's youngest hospitality moguls. Carmen listened without interrupting, her face a mixture of amazement and something that looked like concern. "So, Nathaniel," Carmen said finally, "the boy who used to call you the helps kid, he works for you now? He starts tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. as an assistant manager." A slow smile spread across Carmen's face. 7 a.m. That boy has never been awake before 10 in his life. They both laughed, and some of the tension in the room eased. "But Mama," Madison continued, "this changes things for you too. You don't have to clean their house anymore. You don't have to work for anyone anymore. I can take care of you now." Carmen's smile faded. "Madison, that job has been my life for 16 years. The Pembertons, they're not just employers to me. I watched Nathaniel grow up, even if he turned out to be a spoiled brat. I helped Mrs. Pemberton through her cancer treatments. I know every corner of that house. I know, but, and more than that," Carmen interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "I'm good at what I do. I take pride in my work. Just because my daughter is now rich doesn't mean I want to stop working." Madison felt a familiar stab of frustration mixed with admiration. Her mother had always been fiercely independent, determined to earn her own way, even when it would have been easier to accept help. What if Madison said carefully, "Instead of working for the Pembertons, you worked for me? I'm going to need someone to oversee the housekeeping operations at all the hotels. Someone I trust completely." Carmen's eyes sharpened with interest. "You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a career. Director of Hospitality Services for the entire hotel group. You'd supervise all the housekeeping staff, train new employees, maintain quality standards across all properties. Full benefits, a salary that's triple what the Pembertons were paying you, a company car." Carmen was quiet for a long moment, processing this offer. "You really think I could do that?" "Mama, you've been managing the Pemberton household for years. You know more about what makes a hotel run smoothly than most general managers. You understand guest expectations, staff coordination, supply management. You just never had anyone recognize those skills as management experience. But I never went to college. I don't have business training." Madison reached across the table and took her mother's hands. "You raised a daughter who built a multi-million-dollar company by age 24. I think you can handle hotel management." Carmen's laugh was watery. Madison realized her mother was crying. "I always knew you were special," Carmen whispered. "Even when you were little, asking all those questions, watching everything, taking notes in that little notebook you carried everywhere. But this, Madison, this is beyond anything I ever dreamed for you. It's beyond anything I dreamed for myself," Madison admitted. "But you taught me that dreams are just the starting point. The real work comes in making them happen." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Outside, the Chicago skyline stretched toward the lake, and Madison realized that somewhere in those towers of glass and steel, she now owned a piece of the city that had shaped her entire life. "There's something else," Madison said. "The Pemberton house is going to be sold as part of the business restructuring, but I was thinking, maybe it's time you had a house of your own. Something with a garden, in a neighborhood where you feel safe walking at night." Carmen shook her head immediately. "Madison, I can't let you buy me a house. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to do it because you spent 20 years putting my needs before your own. And now I finally have the resources to return the favor. But people will think that a successful businesswoman takes care of her mother," Madison interrupted. "People will think that Carmen Torres raised a daughter who remembers where she came from and who got her." There, Carmen wiped her eyes with her apron. "When did you get so stubborn?" "I learned from the best." 2 weeks later, Madison stood in the lobby of the Michigan Avenue Pemberton Hotel, watching the controlled chaos of a Monday morning in the hospitality business. Guests checked out while others waited to check in. Staff moved efficiently through their opening routines, and the general hum of a well-run business filled the air. Sarah Mitchell, the new general manager, approached with a tablet full of morning reports. "Occupancy is up 12% from last month," she said, clearly pleased. "The new customer service training program is already showing results in our guest satisfaction scores." "And Nathaniel?" Sarah's smile was carefully diplomatic. "He's learning. He actually showed up at 6:45 this morning because he was afraid of being late. Yesterday, he spent 4 hours helping housekeeping with a water leak on the 8th floor. Got his expensive suit completely soaked. But he didn't complain once." Madison looked across the lobby to where Nathaniel was standing at the concierge desk, earnestly helping an elderly guest plan a walking tour of the Art Institute. His posture was different, now less swagger, more focus. He looked like someone who was actually working instead of someone who was playing at having a job. "He's going to be okay," Sarah continued. "It might take a while to undo years of entitled behavior, but he's genuinely trying. And he's starting to understand how much he didn't know about the business his family built." Madison's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "First day at the River North property went well. The staff is excited about the new quality standards program. Mrs. Pemberton called to congratulate me on my promotion. She cried a little, but I think she's proud. Love you, Mia." Standing in the hotel lobby she now owned, reading a text from her mother who now supervised operations across multiple properties, Madison felt a profound sense of completion. Not the ending of something, but the transformation of everything that had come before. Harrison Pemberton emerged from the elevator, looking more rested than he had in months. The stress lines around his eyes had eased, and there was something in his bearing that suggested relief rather than defeat. "Madison," he said, approaching with a warm smile, "I wanted to thank you for what you're doing with the staff retention program. Keeping our people together through the transition, it means everything to them. They're good employees," Madison replied. "It would have been short-sighted to lose that institutional knowledge. Still, you could have cleaned the house and brought in your own people. The fact that you chose to preserve what was working while fixing what wasn't, it shows real wisdom." They stood together for a moment, watching the hotel operate with the smooth efficiency that came from experienced staff working under competent management. "You know," Harrison said quietly, "my father would have liked you. He always said the best business decisions come from understanding people, not just numbers. You get that in a way that ... double quotes, he glanced toward where Nathaniel was still helping the elderly guest. "In a way that I failed to teach my son, he's learning now," Madison said. "Sometimes the best education comes from starting over." As Harrison walked away, Madison reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, she'd been a successful consultant building a small business. 6 months ago, she'd been the invisible daughter of the help, tolerated but never truly seen by the family that employed her mother. Now she was the majority owner of a hotel empire, the boss of people who had once looked down on her. The woman who had turned a childhood of watching and learning into a foundation for unprecedented success. But perhaps the most satisfying transformation wasn't in the business metrics or the financial statements. It was in the way Nathaniel now treated the housekeeping staff with respect, asking their names and actually listening to their suggestions. It was in the way Harrison had begun to rebuild his relationship with his son, based on shared work rather than shared entitlement. It was in the text messages from her mother, who was discovering that 30 years of household management had given her skills that transferred beautifully to corporate operations. As Madison walked through the hotel that bore her former employer's name but now reflected her vision, she thought about the girl who used to hide in the service corridors, watching and learning from people who never imagined she was, absorbing lessons that would someday change all their lives. That girl had dreamed of proving herself worthy of respect. The woman she had become had learned something better. She had never needed anyone's permission to be worthy. She had simply needed the opportunity to show the world what she was capable of achieving. And now, looking out at the Chicago skyline from the penthouse office that was finally, undeniably hers, Madison Torres knew that this was only the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.